candle setup. I love that.
Oh, thank you. I've learned recently, a little bit of a tangent, that I work, like my focus is really good when I have one of those candles, like a candle burning. I don't know what it is. It's like one of those things where like I put on a candle and it's kind of like, oh, she's about to do something. Yeah, we in our house we don't decorate our bedroom on purpose because we found it was an accident at one point, and then what we found was it was a great surprise when you'd wake up in the morning and leave your room and be like, oh my god, it's a holiday. We do it for Halloween and for Christmas. I do for Halloween and I do for Christmas. The rest don't matter to me. Hello, welcome. I think that we have somebody who is in here quite often. Hi again. And hello, Alex. I don't think that I've seen you in one of my workshops before, but I'm happy to have you. So today we're going to be talking about starting a YouTube. And when we first came up with this topic of starting a YouTube and everything, it was literally only a month after I had started mine. And one thing that I really wanted to share for any creatives or artists who are going into the new year and starting their new goals is how kind of do that. Things I wish I would have known, very preliminary. Believe you and me, I am not getting on here and telling you, and this is how you're going to get subscribers and watch hours and all of a sudden blow up and come viral. That's not what this is, so apologies in advance if that's why you came here. But it is very practical, logistic type things I just wish I would have put into perspective when I first started out. Hello friends, hello wonderful people of YouTube. Welcome back to another video of my creative life with Kel Sweetie, where we do all of the creative things, whatever our creative hearts desire. Today is Vlogmas Day 4. Today we will be doing some book things again. I also need to draw. I have given myself the job of trying to draw each member of BTS for my partner's cousin's birthday that we're having at this house tomorrow. The last time she had a birthday here was her 16th birthday, so it was 2 years ago, and she loved Pennywise from It. So I drew Pennywise face and she on a piece of poster board, and she took that home and now it's up in her room. I don't know why she's not freaked out by it, but that's also why I love her. She's such a great person who's just like, no, it's funny. So we are going to try to draw the members of BTS. That's one thing that I want to do today. Another thing that I need to do today is I need to go to the craft store to pick up some materials for a gift project that I will be doing for my coworkers. I don't want to say it here in case some of my coworkers follow me here and watch my videos, but know that a gift is coming. But it'll probably end up being one of the Vlogmas days because of what's going to go into the craft and everything. But I need to go to the craft store in order to pick that up, as well as some poster board for these portraits that I'm going to be doing for the birthday tomorrow. And then I really wanted to get to doing a reading wrapped video. So on Instagram, you've probably seen anybody who listens to music put their Spotify wrapped videos up, or Spotify wrapped images up. Artists, the top 5 favorite artists, your top 5 songs you loved, top 5 genres that you listen to, things like that. And I had a friend come up with an idea, and now it's also going around BookTube and BookTok and Bookstagram, all the places, where I wasn't listening to very much music. I was listening to a lot of audiobooks. So a lot of people who are in the book community are posting their reading wrapped assets, and I posted mine on Instagram. Here's some of them here, and I had a great time doing it. I used Storygraph, which I've talked about before in another vlog, and it was great. It gave me a great breakdown of what I read this year, which was very interesting to see. I want to do that today and film some of that and everything, so we need to do that as well. And I need to edit my Christmas Decorate With Me video. That will be also coming out as one of these Vlogmas videos. Heads up, of course, I did not film it now and everything, but it's still something that I really want to put up. Some of these Vlogmas videos aren't simply going to be videos of me day by day, but also are gonna some of them are going to be videos of things like content, you know, driven things and everything. So to kind of give me a day to kind of prepare, but also because my life is not exciting, 24/7 freelancing, everything. And so I just want to make sure that I'm still giving you guys something every single day. We are going to see how much of that plan actually happens. Not because I don't think that we can't get it done, but I'm not certain on how long some of those things are going to take. Oh, and you guys just saw me start off the day with doing a Daisy workshop. So if you don't follow me on Instagram or any of my platforms, I work with Daisy, an educational platform, art education platform based out of the UK, to do monthly workshops. And today's was about starting a YouTube channel, which I thought would be really interesting and good for people and creatives who are thinking they're setting their goals now for the new year, their creative goals, and to give them some really like practical advice starting out YouTube, on your mindset starting YouTube, on how you need to approach it. Being 3.5-4 months into YouTube, there's just some things that I wish that I would have kind of realized a little sooner before I started YouTube. You know, that if you blow up on a Halloween decorating video or Halloween types of video, expect to sometimes lose some subscribers when you start going into Christmas videos or a ton of book content because Halloween's over for you and you don't make Halloween specific content. Something that I've experienced recently, which has been a little bit of a hit, has been noticing that I've been losing subscribers since I've been putting out more book and holiday content and stuff along those lines because they started following me for Halloween content. But keeping that in mind, you're like, okay, but they followed me for this. And it's this platform and what this channel is more creative living than just Halloween. Halloween fit into that narrative because I lean into my creativity for the holidays. Just like if anybody starts following me for Christmas content, they're going to be very upset come January when there's no Christmas content coming out anymore, because now we're into just book and crafting and thrifting. And keeping in mind that that's okay because you're building a community, and that's what's important, is you crafting that community. The workshop went really well. Yeah, today will either be extremely busy and I may come in here and go, I didn't finish half of my list. Or it will be great and I'll go, oh my God, we were so productive today. We will see. And I'm gonna take you along with me. So let's get into it. Hey y'all, so we are at Michael's. So yeah, I need a poster board, I need a big paint marker. The one I have is far too small. And then I also need felt. So let's go to Michael's and handle that. We've got a lot to do today. Okay, we are running behind because there was pandemonium inside of that Michael's. I basically got that last shot of the felt and then got nothing else when I was in there because I've never seen that many people in a Michael's. I think it's because Michael's is doing their end of year sale. I think that's why it was crazy in there, and there were far more people in there than I've ever seen. That sale is ridiculous, to do 25% off of everything, and it's including their sale items, which are already really low right now because it's the end of the year and they're trying to get rid of stock. Like, there were crazy sales in there, like buy 2 ribbon, get 3 free. Buy a frame, get 3 free. They almost got me with the frames. They're always trying to get rid of the frames, but while I need a frame, I do not need 4 frames. So yeah, I left that there. But I am on the way back home where I'll be recording my reading wrap video for tomorrow's vlog, and then quickly just spend the rest of the day wherever I have time editing today's vlog that's supposed to come out by 5 o'clock. So I've been posting vlogs later in the day to give me time to edit. And I think that's a double-edged sword because it's giving me time to edit these vlogs, but at the same time, it's late by the time it sometimes comes out and no one's really looking for videos at that time, I guess. So I'm still testing that out. We are at least a half an hour behind at this point on what I kind of scheduled out, but we're moving still through our to-do list, so staying positive. I did find everything I needed at Michael's for the craft, so yeah, check back in at another time when I have time to check back in. So we are going to go over my reading wrapped for this year. I already on my Instagram basically did a breakdown of how I got to these numbers. And I've spoken before in another vlog on how I kind of got a breakdown of everything that I read this year and why certain genres and things were my top 5 by using Storygraph. But I wanted to get on camera and do a vlog of some more in-depth things and also combine it with apparently what was some of my most listened to artists this year. And I kind of created these 3 different categories for all of the artists that I listened to this year and coupled them with books so that I could continue on seeing where everything was kind of starting to add up for what I read this year and was consuming this year. I didn't really watch a lot of movies or shows because I was busy reading or editing or creating something. So that couldn't really be added to this, although I did binge all of Buffy the Vampire Slayer this year, which is the most memorable thing that I did. So that could probably fit into any one of these categories that I'm gonna bring up today. But to get started, I have a list. I know, right? I'm prepared. But I wanted to start with some of the information that's kind of already out there and I had shared on my Instagram, which is a breakdown of my top 5 genres and my top 5 moods, because I thought that was really interesting. Some of it was a little bit we knew that was going to be a thing, but I think that it was surprising for me that science fiction didn't make my top 5 genres this year when it's something that I read pretty often. I really love the science fiction horror trope or science fiction thrillers and everything. But yeah, so I'm gonna quickly share some of that because I feel like a lot of that was already shared on Instagram. So starting off with my top 5 genres, my top 5 genres were thriller, horror, literary, mystery, and the one that somehow slipped in was contemporary. And I think that's because of the memoirs and romances that I read this year that were really not a part of my usual genre. So it knocked science fiction out this year. We will see about next year when I'm not maybe feeling so let's mix up all the genres that I read so I can see what I really like and everything. So for thriller, my recommendation would be The Push. I think The Push was the best thriller that I read this year just because it was the most thought-provoking for me personally as somebody who doesn't necessarily want children and doesn't want to become a mother. I think that The Push, sure, on its surface is about a mother who believes that her daughter is a sociopathic murderer. But at its core and the way that it's told and even the foreword of the book is this idea that generational trauma and depression and that idea of motherhood and how some of us just aren't necessarily born with that quote-unquote mother gene or have no desire to have it can be passed down, and that trauma can actually inform the reasoning as to why you don't want to be a mother and everything. I really loved how this book broke down 4 different generations of women and their issues, not only just being women, but there were 3 generations of women who were mothers and their depression and anger and sadness and anxiety that dealt with being a mother. So that was one of my favorite thrillers this year, just because I had to take my time reading it. Every chapter was hard for me. Near the end, it definitely started to tiptoe way further into thriller, you know, with the idea of the daughter and sociopathic and everything. But before that, it was really a study on motherhood and depression and anger and anxiety around those things. And we all should know here by now, I love a mother horror trope, mother thriller trope, unhinged mother trope. And this book definitely had that. My second top genre was horror. That doesn't surprise anyone, but my top horror that might be a bit of a surprise was The Loop. It had everything that I'm looking for in something that's a horror. Now, some people might be like, that's not necessarily horror, it's more of a thriller. The way this book talked about the kills, I feel like it's a horror. This was high octane, high volume book about science experiments and government training and everything that goes absolutely wrong, and the idea of teenagers in a small town just becoming sociopathic serial killers is so scary, because children already are basically sociopathic serial killers. So I feel like it was spot on, and I really loved how this book actually ended. It wasn't something that was necessarily hopeful, but I don't read horror with hope in mind. To be honest with you, I felt like the way that it ended was very realistic and true. It wasn't a cop-out or anything like that for the reader, and I loved it. It was from the point of view of this Peruvian girl in high school, and I feel like there was a man who wrote this book, but he wrote a very realistic depiction of, I feel like, a high school girl, especially one who has been transplanted into America with white parents from a traumatic childhood. Very well. I feel like it was realistic. I at no point rolled my eyes because she was sitting here hitting on some guy in the middle of a trauma. Yeah, so I feel like it was really spot on. It was really interesting. As soon as basically you got 5 pages into the book, it just kept going. And at that moment, I was getting through a reading slump, so that was exactly what I needed. So my top horror this year was The Loop for me. My next genre that I apparently was obsessed with this year was literary. I'm not really certain what literary as a genre means. I'm guessing it's something that doesn't rot your brain, but I don't know. I really didn't get the idea of what literary is. Like, I'm not certain what contemporary really means. Like, does that just mean that it's modern and not historical? That could be anything on this list. I don't really read a lot of historical fiction or even just historical nonfiction, so yeah, I was kind of confused by this genre. But my favorite one out of what was offered to me on Storygraph on what makes up that genre was Severance, which is a dystopian future book that was written in 2020. It was published in 2020, right before the pandemic, which is very scary when you realize kind of how the book kind of works out. It talks about the shutdown, and it talks about this sickness that people have where you start repeating what your body has done before you were sick. So you're stuck in this loop of your routine till your body essentially gives out. It's like zombies, but not. And it's from the point of view of a second generation Asian American and her experience while in this entire experience of trying to survive the apocalypse, essentially. I thought it was a really interesting book about the idea of duty and job and working, and especially considering, I feel like if I would have read this during the pandemic on top of Parable of the Sower, I would have been out. It would have been way too much too early, but it was such a great read, and that underneath all of this apocalyptic survival story was really this conversation of people of color and their relation to work and tradition and routines and everything, and how we have been taught, at least one way or another, to support a stable job or a stable tradition or whatever till the end, because there is such a lack of stability within like our own histories. Like this main character, even during the apocalypse, was staying at her job until it was absolutely clear that she was not gonna get, nothing was coming for her, you know? And that, I think that part of the story was the most interesting, when after the apocalypse hit and what her experience was during that whole experience. My next one was mystery, which my favorite mystery this year was Not So Perfect Strangers. I loved this book. It is about two women, Madison, who is a white woman who is upper class and everything, and a black woman, Tasha, I believe her name is, and she's lower middle class. They both are in supposedly abusive relationships of some sort, and Tasha's on the run from her husband. She runs into Madison. She assumes that Madison is also on the run, so she helps her. But Madison has an idea on how they can fix their situation, and it's killing their husbands. Tasha's like, you're crazy, I'm not doing that. Madison says, you just need to push. So I'm gonna take care of it for you. And it goes from there. It is wild. It kind of starts off at the beginning, in the present, and it kind of works its way backwards a little bit, but not so much back and forth that you're kind of like having to try and keep up and everything. So it's just really good. It was such a great read. I loved that they somehow fit social issues about like around the police and around the idea of white women and black women in regards to the law, and it helping them or hurting them. These conversations I felt, or even the conversation of children involved when it comes to domestic violence and abuse in the household. Love that conversation. All of it was just really, really great. And I felt like all these things were covered in the book without it basically serving it to you. Like, it just felt very natural reading it. Like it was just life, but because it was put on paper, you were just like, oh, I can see right now what it's trying to talk about. Like, what's the underlying conversation under this story? Because as we know here, I love horror and thrillers with a trope of an underlying social issue, because for me, I feel like that is the purpose of like thriller and horror and mystery, is this idea of the impossible being absolutely possible, and forcing you to make these parallels between this story that you think is insane and real life, whether it's a large parallel or something that's even closer. So Not So Perfect Strangers was amazing, and I personally feel like I didn't hear enough people talking about it. I felt like Barnes & Noble was trying to push it though very hard, because I even picked it up because I think it was on the half off table or something. That's usually like things that I've not heard a lot of people talk of. It's usually because it's on those buy one get one half off tables, and I'm like, okay, this is a great cover. The last genre that was in my top this year was contemporary. And again, I'm not really certain of what, and maybe like let me know down in the comments, because I still feel like I don't have a huge grasp on what literary or contemporary genres kind of are, and especially this year after the Goodreads Awards, which that was every year. I don't even know why I look at it anymore, but I feel like I don't have a huge grasp on what that genre is, but apparently it was in my top, and Notes on an Execution, I would say, was my favorite one based off of what they said was contemporary that I read this year. Notes on an Execution was definitely one of my best ones in that genre. I did take, I think, a star off, so I think it was like a 4.5 or a 4-star that I gave it, just because the ending got strange with one of the main characters, or one of the women surrounding this killer's life. So it's all about this man who's on death row, and it's basically he's got 12 more hours until he's sentenced, and they're telling his entire story amongst 3 different women who were integral to his life. So an ex-wife of his, his mother, and the detective who ended up catching him. And the story with the detective kind of got a little strange in my opinion. I don't think that it made as much sense as I would have liked, and it didn't hit home as much as like the story behind the mother and even the ex-wife who was involved with him. Both of their stories felt very strong to me, and at the end I think you're reading it thinking that there's some redemption, depending on who you are. For, I think, some people who are more optimistic, you're hoping that you're reading it feeling some sort of redemption by the end of it, of this person who, and it's clear that he has absolutely done all these crimes. He is not a good person at all. So by the time you're reading it, it's then a question of, but even though he is not a good person, should we still feel empathy whatsoever for this person? Because at the end of the day, it is still their last day. And I think that's a very hard question. I thought that was interesting. I also thought that it was interesting, the question of, but can killers or murderers still be loved? And are they loved by somebody out there? And like real love, not obsession. As you know, things like the Night Stalker, Ricky Ramirez, or anybody like that is concerned, but like actual love, like are they capable of being loved by somebody out there and everything. So I thought that was a really interesting, hard book, but a really great book. At the end of it, it kept me still thinking about it. And so that was one of my top contemporary novels this year, apparently. Still lost in the genre, but that was my favorite. Going into moods. So my top 5 moods this year were dark, mysterious, tense, emotional, and reflective. These are all spot on. I feel like when I look for a book, these are exactly the moods that I'm looking for in that book. I don't think that they were wrong about any of it. I'm not even sure what the other moods are, but these are it. This is pretty certain this is right. Starting off with dark, one of my top 5 books this year, and I think it was even my top 5 book of the year, was Baby Teeth. So good. I want to read everything Soje Stage. So I think that's how you say it. I think it's like German or Scandinavian. I have to look at how you properly say their name. But Baby Teeth was so good. And again, another book I picked up simply because it was on the half off table. I am so happy I picked up this book. It was about a mother and a daughter, and it's from both of their point of views. The mother has Crohn's disease, which I'll talk about in a second on why that was so important for me and why this book specifically for me was such a great read. And the daughter is a sociopath with what I believe is a bit of a Freudian Oedipus complex towards her father. But essentially, she wants to kill her mother because she thinks that she's getting in the way of her relationship with her father, and she just hates her. So the way this book ended was very interesting, because I feel like it wasn't hopeful. Again, it wasn't hopeful. I'm not looking for a book that's hopeful, and this book wasn't that. But the reason why it was so amazing was, one, I loved getting the point of view of the child. She's only about 6 or 7 years old, so it was very interesting kind of getting that point of view. But what I really loved was near the end, I loved hearing about the mother who was suffering from depression. And it made me realize my mother has Crohn's disease. I have always wondered about her own struggles with the sickness. And the realization that you can have, there are two, as far as depression is concerned, there's many different types of depression. But it can be emotionally, you can have depression, you know, just naturally, your biochemistry, this, that, and the other. And then you can have depression simply because of sickness. Like, how many people are living with day-to-day chronic diseases and have depression, not because of it's a biochemically they have depression, but because they have depression because of the lives that they live through their sickness. Not necessarily the lives that they live, and like biochemically they're more inclined to be depressive or something along those lines. And I think that it was interesting to distinguish between the two, but also to ask that question of, how does that affect my mother and how she is now and her Crohn's disease? And not only that, but also just getting a look at what the day-to-day is for somebody with Crohn's disease, how they live in fear of eating all the time, how they constantly are in fear of their bodies because of what, you know, that they can't trust them. And that there's even been like the idea of your stomach literally being outside of itself and everything. It was such an eye-opener for me. I got on the phone with my mom and talked for hours after that book, and it was so helpful for me. If you know anybody with Crohn's disease, I do recommend you read the book. It is a dark book. At the end of the day, it's a psychological horror type thriller book, but the parts regarding the mother and her Crohn's disease, I think, was so much more eye-opening than any book that I've ever read or any information I've ever heard about it. It really made me think twice about my mother's experience with the disease and what that really means for her and her experience through life. Mysterious, I put Dark Matter. Dark Matter was definitely one of my top ones. I feel like it was mysterious. It was like this sci-fi, high octane type of thriller about clones and other universes, and really at its core the idea that if you were in any other universe or you weren't you as you are right now, would you still choose the life that you have right now? And I think that there's no way to ever really answer that question, but in this book, the main character gets to answer that question for himself on, even if you didn't become who you thought you're supposed to become, is it actually better for you in the long run? And some of us never get that question because it's so hypothetical. Get that answer because it's so hypothetical. But in this book, he gets to answer that for himself, and the answer is yes. Like, I would choose this life over success, over the fame, over the whatever, every single time, because it means that I have these two people, my son and my wife in it, and basically every version of him is trying to get that life. And so that was so interesting. I could easily see this as like an actual movie. Actually, I think that it's a show. I have to double back because I'm almost positive this is a show. I think that's one of the reasons why I read it. That was one of my best. I also did a cover rework recently. I think that was like a couple of days ago on this one. And it's definitely one of my top 5 this year. It combined basically the thought-provoking stuff and the thriller and the sci-fi idea and everything all in one. My third mood for this year was Tense, which was my top book for this mood was How to Sell a Haunted House. As we know, I love Grady Hendrix. Read basically everything of his so far. I've yet to be absolutely disappointed. I feel like he's a love or hate type of author, and this book I think was probably one of my favorites from Grady Hendrix, just because of the conversation around grief and generational trauma, which is a trope of mine I love in horror, and the idea that family secrets can really become something that haunts generations further down, and they'll be sitting here like, why is that bothering me? I don't know why that thing is now like haunting me. In this book they take it literally, but I just feel like, one, there was a lot of body trauma in this book. I will never be able to unsee some of the things that were described in this book surrounding things like amputation and everything. I'm also deathly afraid of puppets now. Like, if I saw Elmo in a dark alley, I would walk very quickly away from said alley. I am afraid of puppets now, especially. I feel like this book was just written really well, and at the end, for its surrounding idea to be focused on this idea of generational trauma, I think that it's very interesting, and I love the topic of it. Absolutely loved it. And I feel like you didn't lose any of the scariness of the book just because of that topic being the point of the whole story. So that was my top 5 book for Tense mood. My 4th mood was Emotional. Hands down, that goes to I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. It is worth all of the praise that it is getting. Jeanette put her heart on these pages, and I listen to the audiobook and she reads the audiobook, and I feel like it's even more rough to hear her work through the audiobook, because you can tell that she's removed herself from the situation so much so that she doesn't try and give power to those situations, or she's not been able to feel those situations enough, or else she would essentially just absolutely crumble. you can hear it. You can hear it in her voice. You can hear it in the pages, the way she talks about some of those things, how she still talks about those things with a dark humor in order to cope with them. And it is rough. I mean, you just absolutely had no idea that this same character, I mean, I grew up in the age of iCarly. You know, you just don't know. Like, hearing what was going on the same time as that show was, it's just unbelievable to hear about things that her mother did, or the trauma she went through from the producers, or the trauma she went through from her family, and the question at the end being, if you never received actual apology or any sort of closure from a parent who had hurt you so much, what does that mean for you? Like, can you move on, or can you be healed even if you never receive that necessary closure? And I think that that's a really big question for some of us who have a lot of parental trauma, or are healing right now and are learning that their parents maybe will never understand how they've hurt them, and they will probably never really get the apology that they're deserved, which, again, I don't think that it's something that you can answer right after the book is read, or something you can even answer within a week. I'm still answering that question for myself, you know? I just think that it was a great book to read, and it wasn't just something where you're just reading about a celebrity's life and how traumatic it is, but it also is asking of you to ask these questions of yourself in whatever is applicable for you. My last mood for 2023 was reflective, and my favorite top 5 one for that was It Came From the Closet. I know that the last book that I just read I just talked about, seemed like, well, that one was really reflective. But I feel like I had so much more emotion going into that one as opposed to It Came From the Closet, which I had taken doses, because you're hearing the authors read their portions of the book, and it's about queerness and its relation to horror and those personal experiences within that dichotomy, and it was rough. There's anger in this book. It's not just, oh, and I have this acceptance, or I found my family, or these beautiful parts. It is the ugly parts. It is the rough parts. It is the depressive parts. It is rough. I could only find myself here listening to 1 or 2 stories at a time because of how rough it was. But by the time I got to the end of it, it really was really a great book. And I feel like it was really well-rounded as far as the stories are concerned, and the queerness, the different queer spectrum like stories that were talked about. I feel like it was across the board on many different forms of queerness. One of the best descriptions I've ever heard of in regards to like the bisexual experience, it talked about being bisexual and that discovery from the point of view of the movie Jennifer's Body, which is a bisexual cult classic. I love Jennifer's Body, and so that was even better, but it was so honest and such, like, I felt like every single sentence I went, yes, yes, yes. Every single sentence about that experience, especially being in high school, and especially feeling like you still don't have the language necessary to talk about those things, because the language to talk about those things isn't readily available, or it's shrouded in either the heterosexual or homosexual experience on not being enough for either. And therefore it causes you to second guess every last bit of being bisexual. I absolutely loved that story, and it was extremely reflective. I still think about that story all the time in regards to my sexuality, and whenever I am feeling like I am questioning it because of others or whatever the case may be, it was such a great story to read. I think that it was also extremely eye-opening and heartbreaking for me to learn about the process of surrogacy. What a rough ride. It was so rough to hear about, and also not just surrogacy, but also miscarriage. There were some things I did not realize about those who carry a miscarriage, and things that I never really took into account. Like the idea that, you know, once you're a certain level or a certain stage of the pregnancy and you have a miscarriage, you still have to have that child. How traumatic is that? Even now, like, just I still can't wrap my mind around that sort of trauma, having to experience that. Just such a reflective, such an amazing book. I feel like regardless of what every story is and whether or not you identify with those stories, I feel like there's so much to learn within each story. So this part of my reading wrapped, is a little bit different from any other ones that I've kind of seen, and I didn't post this on my Instagram, and this part will be a little bit quicker. But one thing I wanted to do was kind of look at all of the artists that I listened to this year, because it was very obvious I was going through different eras throughout the year. And the grouping of like types of music I was listening to. And so I thought it'd be interesting to look at the parallels between those eras of music I was listening to this year along with the books that I was listening to and what books would fit into that era. So I'm not going to talk too much about why each book is kind of in each one. At least I hope not to. But I thought it would be kind of like funny to take a look at what those different things are. So like the first one, that era that I came up with was the Unhinged Woman era. I listened to a lot of Jessie Reyez this year, a lot of Kiana Lede, and I know for anybody who knows me at work or outside, you're gonna probably kill me for this, but I did listen to a couple of songs on SZA's album this year quite often. Low is unmatched, and regardless of the fact that it seems like every SZA fan who absolutely loved this album hated SOS, the intro song, I loved yelling that in the car. Absolutely loved it. Those were my two songs. Yessie from Jessie Reyez was an amazing album. I think that a lot of people did not talk about that album as much as they should have, but I think it was a really, really great project. And Kiana Lede's album this year, while I did not maybe like the entire project, Promise Me, the most problematic song I've ever heard of in my life, that is also an amazing song. I will play that mess out and be like, I am back to I'm being unhealed. Those were like the main ones. I did not listen to those full projects on repeat, but there were songs from each one of those that were really good. I think even Chloe Bailey's album, I know, it wasn't that great of an album as far as the album is concerned, but Pray It Away really grew on me. It really, really grew on me, along with Lose You. That was another one that I was a little bit like, wow, I think I like that one as well. That's weird. So again, I was surprised by these people being in my top, but when I look back, I really, really just loved being unhinged and yelling in my car, singing in my car, very problematic lyrics, and that therefore made the Unhinged Woman era. In the Unhinged Woman era, books that I read, I didn't want to use just books that I just mentioned were my top this year, so I did add some more books because we all know I loved an Unhinged Woman, and really any of the ones that I kind of mentioned just a second ago could maybe fit into the Unhinged Woman era, but 4 books that were not already mentioned that I think could fit into that is 2 Amona Awards, Bunny as well as Rouge, The Only One Left, and The Woman in the Window. Now, The Woman in the Window did not get an amazing rating for me. The ending was fantastic. The rest of it was lackluster and not great writing. But it is unhinged. That woman is unhinged. So she made it. She better have her lucky stars if she made it. But she made it. And I feel like those 4, if you're in an Unhinged Woman era, I feel like those 4 books could really do it for you. Another era that I was going through this year was definitely a chill romance, a real romance era. I listened to a lot of Blast, Vito, and Eric Bellinger on repeat. I went through a moment, I think this summer, where that's all I was listening to. I think I even created a playlist that had those 3 artists, because they all 3 of those artists essentially sound very alike, and I would just ride around. Now, keep in mind, if I didn't live in LA, I might not have gone through that era because it's very much LA right around music. But I definitely went through that. And this year, I read more romance than I think I've ever read. Every romance I think that I currently have was bought this year, which is surprising. Now, the 4 books that made it into that was 7 Days in June, Daisy Jones and the Six, Take a Hint, Danny Brown, and Book Lovers. All of those I loved. I absolutely loved. Now, 7 Days in June lost a star. I absolutely loved it. And it ended too hopeful and not realistic for those involved, which is why it lost a star. And some people have called me a pessimist. No, I'm a realist, and nothing is more romantic than something that is real, in my opinion. I will say that. Take a Hint, Danny Brown was amazing. I loved it. I would even reread that one. I'm not a rereader, but I would reread that one. I still need to read the other 2, but I'm afraid, honestly, to read the other 2 Brown sisters because I feel like I won't resonate with them as much as I did with Danny. She was just really great, and her mans was fine. And I love their whole whole thing. It was great. It felt like it was a romance written specifically for me. Then Daisy Jones and the Six was really great. Honestly, read the book. The show does not match up to the book whatsoever, which surprisingly enough happened. But it's a rock doc type of book, and I really loved that idea of like this rock documentary type romance. And Book Lovers. I started off the year with Book Lovers, and I felt like that was a really great book. I felt like it was a very realistic romance. It wasn't too fluffy. The people were kind of rough around the edges, but not so much that it felt forced. I loved it. I really did like it. So those are my 4 romance novels. Probably, I think there's like 1 or 2 that are missing off that list of other ones that I read this year, which is just wild to me. And then my last one, I don't think that I could come up with a quippy enough title for this era. So I just came up with Alternatives Not Dead. My Alternatives Not Dead era. And really it has to do with my alternative, my alt-rock nostalgia era. I made a playlist of all of the alt-pop music that I absolutely loved growing up, which included Avril Lavigne, Panic at the Disco, and Fall Out Boy. But those are the 3 main ones who I was yelling in the car going to work every morning. Loved it. And in this one, it's a little bit like, I feel like I included books that reminded me of things in this genre rather than it having a very clear, like, oh, like the last one was romance. Like the one before that, like it was clearly like women characters who are crazy. This one, I feel like it was more of like a vibe. rather than it being like, and this is a genre of just science fiction or thrillers or whatever. So Fourth Wing was included. I feel like Fourth Wing was not slow. It was moving. It was moving all of the time and everything. I felt like it was giving like main character energy. I'm not like other girls' energy. Very Avril Lavigne. Dead Silence. I feel like it's not like that one was like constantly yelling at you like Dark Matter was, but I do feel like that one was moving. It was really high volume, just moving the entire time. Project Hail Mary. And Project Hail Mary is kind of cozy as a sci-fi thriller, but at the end of the day, it's still aliens and the whole world's ending. I feel like that's the alternative rock. Maybe that's the thing, is that these are books that have high stakes but cozy people. And I feel like alt-rock or alt-pop from like the early 2000s was, we sound like a rock band, we don't look like a rock band type of music. There we go. We just worked that out together. That's what this is. And the last one in this, I felt like I really needed to include this somewhere. It is the only graphic novel that I read this year, and that was The High Desert, which was a memoir of the creator of Afropunk. He's no longer associated, but his experience growing up in the high desert and learning about punk music and being Black and in punk during that time. And it was amazing. Considering the music concept, I felt like it was necessary to add it. That is my reading wrap for 2023. I really enjoyed doing this. I really enjoyed looking at what I read this year. I really enjoyed taking a look at what I was interested in this year. I think I was surprised by a couple of things, like how much romance I read, how much horror I did not read. But I really love doing this. I love really just reflecting back on what I read this year. Again, I read more books this year than I read last year when I started falling in love with books again. And I'm hoping this year I have one more book to go and I'll hit my 50 read books goal this year. And next year I'm trying to up it to 60. We don't want to do 75. I feel like 75 is just for, I feel like maybe I'll do 75. Last year's, I think I was at 39 books last year. This year I hit 50, so I was like 10 more. Okay, knowing that progression, we'll do 65. I think 65 is a good number to maybe up to next year. At some point, I want to get to 3 digits. I feel like whenever I see anybody read like 100 books this year, I'm just like, that's a wild number. So yeah, here's to reading more books next year and having some more surprises on what I read. That's gonna be it for today's Vlogmas. I had so much fun recording this today, but we will see. I have some more things coming up, and things are definitely the week of Christmas going to speed up, and there's going to be a whole lot of Christmas content. But I also know that they're probably going to be shorter videos because I'm going to have less time to edit them. So here's to that. Subscribe if you're looking for more book content or holiday content or just creative content of any kind. I am posting something every single day up until Christmas, the day after Christmas, because I still have to put that out on the 26th. That works. That makes sense. But yeah, until then, I'll see y'all in the next one. See ya. Bye.